And I do remember a time in my Calvinism where I remember where I was standing at Hardin Simmons University in Abilene, Texas. I remember where I was walking when this kind of dawned on me after becoming a Calvinist. And this is really not uniquely a Calvinist claim, but it was something that Calvinism emphasized to the point where I understood it, is that nothing befalls me that doesn't pass through his hands. In other words, if it happens to me, it's coming through the hands of our sovereign, our God. And there was some comfort in that, in the sense of saying nothing's going to happen to me outside of the will of God in the Calvinistic sense, is the way I was understanding at that time. Now, I may nuance that differently today as a provisionist, saying that sometimes things that happen to me are actually a result of my sin. And so if I go out and steal something and then end up in prison, then I go, oh, well, God must have sovereignly brought that to pass. Well, no, that was your stupidity, Leighton. You went and did something dumb and you got yourself in trouble for it. But I remember feeling that comfort of thinking I'm under his protection. So I can understand maybe that from that vantage point of the determinism of God's sovereignty from a Calvinistic vantage point, is to say, well, the script is playing out exactly the way God wrote it, and so I don't have much to worry about here because it's going to happen exactly the way it's supposed to. The problem with that is when that kind of logic becomes somewhat fatalistic to the point where you start thinking things like, well, it doesn't matter if I look at pornography then, or if it doesn't matter if I steal this thing then. It doesn't matter if I do this thing because it's all been scripted by God if I do these things. And therefore, I kind of have a justification for doing stupid things. And again, I know every Calvinist would say, well, that's dumb. Don't think that way. But some people do think that way,
well,
whether you want
and
them
there's
to
a
or not.
difference between what we see as a logical entailment of what you're saying,
right,
and how you live your life and how you happen to think about things, right?
Yeah, and that's part of the bigger difference between the two. Mm-hmm. And I think it is more of you're criticizing a logical entailment. In other words, if you believe this, then it seems to logically follow that this also must be true. Mm-hmm. For example, if I looked at pornography and became addicted to pornography, and I also believe God ordains whatsoever comes to pass, then it must entail that God ordained for me to look at pornography. Mm-hmm. And therefore, if God ordained me to look at pornography, I could not have done otherwise. I had to do what God ordained me to do. Therefore, my addiction to and the consequences of my pornography addiction are a result of God's decree, not my choice, and ultimately my choice, because God chose what I would choose in that regard. Mm-hmm. And therefore now I have a justification for my addiction. And that's what every addict is looking for is, hey, I want to be able to give a good reason for why I did something stupid. Well, God ordained me to do that stupid thing.
Any old rationality will do if you really want to sin in the moment.
Exactly, and that's what we're all looking for, and that's why I'm saying, even though a good Calvinist would say, don't ever do that, that's dumb, that's bad logic or whatever, it doesn't mean that there aren't some Christians out there who are doing that. Mm-hmm. And the reason they're doing that, apparently, if Calvinism is true, is because God's ordained it for them to think of Calvinism in a fatalistic way, and thus to excuse their behavior.
This, of course, Leighton, brings us back to our colleague Tim Stratton's point that, okay, look, if you want to be able to think about yourself as a rational person, as a person who does rational thinking and claims to know things, well, if everything you think, not just what you do or decide to believe or whatever, everything you think, every thought that goes through your head is determined, and it's determined by God, here's the problem. We know that people believe Christians believe wrong things about Christianity and about Calvinism and about eschatology and all that. Why do they think that way? Because God determined for them to think that way. So I'm not in control of what I end up thinking. Ultimately, God determines whatever I end up thinking, and he determines some people to believe wrong things. So how can I ever know for sure that I'm believing the right thing about any particular piece of Christian doctrine?
Right. Yeah, and I think he makes a really strong case. Matter of fact, there is a discussion with Chris Date and Tim Stratton on that very point.
Great
and I think it's
discussion.
a very, very good discussion. Two good minds, who contend with each other over this topic, and I think it's worthwhile hearing it if you haven't heard that discussion between those two guys.
Yeah.
Both of them professors at Trinity Seminary, by the way.
That's right.
So you can get a full education there, and from both perspectives.